What if I told you that, decades before Tesla came along, a highly advanced electric car was developed with the help of NASA, but it completely disappeared from official records? Imagine the following scene. Early 1970s. The world faces one of the biggest oil crises in history. Endless lines at gas stations, global economic tension, and a question hanging in the air. How long will humanity depend on oil? Amid this scenario of uncertainty, a government agency known for launching rockets to the moon begins working on something that no one expected: an electric car, a clean, silent, functional energy-powered vehicle, and more advanced than anything else at the time. But why would NASA be involved with automobiles? The answer lies in your obsession with innovation. During the space race, engineers at the American Space Agency developed technologies that went far beyond rockets. Lighter batteries, alternative propulsion systems, extremely energy-efficient materials. It was natural that part of this knowledge would be tested on dry land, and an ultra-secretive project involving an electric vehicle was started. But strangely, this project never saw the light of day. No public disclosure, no commercial release, no press conference, nothing. It's as if he was erased from history. For years, rumors circulated among industry experts. The government had developed a car with a range much higher than the standards of the time, capable of traveling for hundreds of kilometers without recharging. Some say it used a combination of solar cells and very high-density batteries. Others claim that the vehicle was equipped with an energy regeneration system that only reappeared decades later in more modern models. But then, what happened to this technology? Why did she disappear? Who had an interest in ensuring that this car never hit the streets? Some point directly to the oil industry, which at the time exerted heavy pressure on governments and corporations. Others believe that large automakers saw this as a threat to their business model based on constant maintenance, replacement of parts, and dependence on fossil fuels. The scariest thing is that, to this day, when official records of this project are searched, almost nothing is found. It's as if it had been erased, removed from the public archives. The few documents that remain are fragmentary, hidden in obscure reports, and almost never directly mention the vehicle. They only suggest tests, simulations, and technical data out of context. Why this silence? What was there about this project that would justify so much effort to hide it? In this video, you will discover a story that few know, and that many prefer to ignore. A story that links the most respected space agency on the planet, NASA, to a mysterious, advanced, and completely outside the norm automotive project of its time: an electric car. Yes, a fully electric car developed based on aerospace technologies, capable of performing feats that, to this day, are considered impressive. But, strangely, it disappeared. You will understand how this project was born, what interests were behind it, and why it disappeared without leaving a clear trace in the public archives. Let's examine nearly forgotten documents, obscure interviews, and records that indicate NASA was involved in an initiative that could have changed the course of automotive history. What's more, let's talk about the people who tried to bring this truth to light and were silenced. But the most important part comes at the end, a technical detail that was kept secret for decades, an advance that could have placed electric cars at the top of the market back in the 70s, something that, if it had been revealed to the public, could have anticipated the revolution in electrically powered vehicles by 50 years. A specific piece, a fundamental component, an innovation that is still not widely used today, but which already existed at that time, ready to be applied on an industrial scale. This is one of those stories that the more you investigate, the more questions arise. Why would NASA, an agency focused on space exploration, be testing electric land vehicles? And why, instead of publicizing this progress, would she have chosen to remain silent? Some say it was a strategic decision. Others point to external pressures. And there are those who claim that from the beginning, the intention was only to test the potential of the technology, without ever allowing it to reach the public. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: there is something they don't want you to know. You are about to discover a hidden part of the history of electric mobility, a missing piece in the puzzle of suppressed innovations. And at the end of this video, perhaps you will see current advances with different eyes. Maybe you realize that the future of electric cars was once among us, but it was buried before it even began. Stay until the end. What will be revealed may not only surprise you. It may also make you rethink everything you've heard about electric cars, clean energy, and the real interests that drive the technologies of our time. It's the 1970s. The world is changing. The decade begins marked by a global shock, the first major oil crisis. In 1973, OPEC countries decided to cut production and increase barrel prices. The reason? Political pressure during the Yom Kippur War. But the effect is devastating. The United States, dependent on foreign oil, panics. The price of fuel skyrockets. Gas stations are crowded. Entire families queue for hours to fill up their cars. The economy begins to crumble. And with it, confidence in fossil energy. Amid this turmoil, the American government realizes an uncomfortable truth. The most powerful nation in the world is vulnerable. Vulnerable to oil, vulnerable to external shocks, vulnerable to the technological choices made in recent decades. This is where NASA comes in. NASA, which had conquered the world. By landing a man on the moon just a few years earlier, was a symbol of innovation and technological supremacy. It was proof that the United States dominated science and the future. But with the end of Project Apollo, the agency needed new missions, new purposes, and mainly new applications for technologies developed in the space race. What few people know is that NASA didn't just work with rockets. Behind the scenes, agency engineers were involved in highly advanced projects in energy storage, high-density batteries, electric propulsion, and ultralight materials, all ideal for creating more efficient land vehicles. With the discreet support of departments linked to the Department of Energy and in partnership with automotive industry giants, such as General Motors, a project was born that seemed ahead of its time: the development of an experimental electric car with record autonomy and low environmental impact. The goal was ambitious: to create an urban vehicle that could run without a drop of gasoline. The official name of this program was never widely publicized. It appeared in technical reports with generic, often classified acronyms. But some information escaped. Prototypes were assembled inside secret laboratories at NASA research centers, especially in Langley and Ames. The first tests were carried out on closed tracks. Preliminary data was promising. The experimental vehicle achieved autonomy marks that, in the 1970s, seemed impossible: more than 300 kilometers on a single charge, according to internal documents. This happened while the most economical combustion models at the time barely exceeded 10 km per liter. In terms of energy efficiency, NASA's electric car looked like it came from the future. The project used lithium batteries in an initial phase, later replaced by experimental nickel-metal hydride cells, a technology that would only become commercial decades later. Furthermore, the vehicle had an energy regeneration system for the brakes, something that would only become popular in the 2000s. There were also solar panels attached to the roof to power auxiliary systems and maintain a minimum active battery charge during long periods of parking. All this in the 70s. But the most impressive thing was what came next. A thermal control system originally developed for satellites was adapted to the car, allowing the batteries to maintain constant performance even in extreme temperatures. This solved one of the biggest problems that electric cars still face today: the drop in performance in cold climates. If this project had been carried out, it could have anticipated by at least 4 decades what we now call the electrical revolution. It could have completely changed the course of the global automotive industry. But then, something happened. Without any public notice, the project was halted, shelved, archived with no plans for resumption. Partnerships with the automotive industry have been terminated. The prototypes, according to former employees at the time, were dismantled. And most intriguingly, Technical reports simply disappeared from libraries and documentation centers. Those working on the program were reassigned to other areas, and NASA's electric car became just a legend, told at technical conferences, mentioned in lost interviews, and whispered among retired engineers. The official version? The project would have been canceled due to commercial unviability and change in strategic priorities. But there was no shortage of suspicions. Some researchers stated that the cancellation coincided with meetings between representatives of the automotive industry and high-ranking members of the government. Others reported strong pressure not to publish the data, especially those that demonstrated the feasibility of replacing oil with electrical energy in urban vehicles. During that same period, investments in renewable energy were also reduced. Large advertising campaigns began to highlight the importance of oil for the economy, and the automotive industry once again invested heavily in combustion vehicles, driven by tax incentives and billion-dollar trade agreements. Coincidence? Perhaps. But for many, it was the beginning of intentional erasure, an attempt to silence technologies that could threaten the status quo. After all, if a truly efficient electric car were launched in the 1970s, what would happen to the oil industry? With the giants of the automotive sector? With the political interests that revolved around this energy structure? The Cold War also contributed to the climate of secrecy. Everything was potentially strategic. Everything could represent an advantage or a threat. Any technology that escaped state control was treated with caution. This included, of course, an electric car capable of making a nation less dependent on fossil fuels, something that could destabilize alliances, international contracts, and consolidated power structures. And so, amid silences, omissions, and missing documents, NASA's electric car disappeared from history. Only fragments remained, testimonials, some blurry images on forgotten microfilm. But the question remains, why hide such a relevant innovation? Who benefited from his disappearance? And is it possible that today, with all the current technology, we are still just trying to recover what we already had 50 years ago? Why would a space agency with access to the most advanced technologies on the planet, financed with billions in public resources, abandon a project that could revolutionize the way the world moves? This is the question that remains without a clear answer to this day. NASA is no ordinary company. It is not limited by the market, quarterly profit, or consumer preferences. It exists to explore the unknown, develop the impossible, transform ideas into reality. If anyone had the technical capacity, structure, and knowledge to create a revolutionary electric car, it was NASA. And for a brief period in the 1970s, she did just that. Developed, tested, and perfected an electric vehicle prototype with performance far above what was available at the time. A vehicle that defied the logic of the traditional automotive market. That didn't require gasoline, oil, and constant maintenance. That didn't depend on noisy combustion engines. A silent, clean, and extremely efficient car, but suddenly he disappeared. For those who study the behind-the-scenes of technology and the energy industry, this type of disappearance is nothing new. There is a specific term for this: technological censorship. This is when an innovation that threatens billion-dollar sectors is systematically discredited, shelved, or forgotten, not because it doesn't work, but because it works too much. And that appears to be exactly the case with NASA's electric car. Behind the scenes, reports indicate that the decision to cancel the project was not merely technical. There was no failure in the prototype. There was no insurmountable technological limitation. There was pressure, external pressure, crossed interests, power conflicts. The 1970s were a sensitive time for the American economy. Large automakers like Ford, GM, and Chrysler represented not just companies. They were pillars of the United States economic structure. They generated millions of jobs, paid colossal taxes, and directly influenced the country's political behavior. Anything that put this empire at risk needed to be carefully controlled. And NASA's electric car, despite being experimental, represented exactly that, a risk, a symbol of rupture with the traditional model based on oil, heavy maintenance, and continuous consumption of parts and fuel. If this technology were to move forward, it could cause a systemic collapse in the automotive market, something that no government, no matter how progressive, would be willing to suddenly face. On the other side, the oil industry. More than powerful, it was, and still is, one of the largest economic conglomerates on the planet. The so-called Seven Sisters, as the large oil corporations were known at the time, had ramifications at all levels of political, economic, and military power. They sponsored political campaigns, influenced legislative decisions, and shaped diplomatic strategies. And these same corporations saw the electric car as an existential threat. Imagine a scenario where vehicles no longer depend on fossil fuel, where millions of consumers abandon gas stations, where billion-dollar profits turn into losses. It's a nightmare for any energy executive at the time. The solution? Control the narrative. Silence advances. Redirect investments. Erase technology from the map. And that's exactly what happened. Documents disappeared. Proposals were shelved. Engineers were redirected. The experimental batteries were reclassified as non-viable. And official history rewrote itself in silence. NASA's electric car ceased to exist, not because it was a failure, but because it worked too well. This type of technological erasure is not exclusive to this case. History is full of examples. Water engines, alternative fuels, free energy systems, unlimited life batteries. In all these cases, the pattern repeats itself. An innovation emerges, challenges the pillars of the traditional economy, generates interest, and soon after it is suppressed by invisible forces. What few realize is that this dynamic, it's not just for money, but for power. Controlling energy is controlling society. Controlling transport means controlling mobility, production, and consumption. An efficient, cheap, and durable electric car isn't just a threat to profits. It's a threat to the logic of the system as a whole. It breaks the dependency model. Therefore, it was not just the oil industry that acted. The automakers themselves, upon realizing the destructive potential of the new technology on their business models, took part in the process. Rarely publicized. Internal reports from the time suggest that General Motors executives considered the project incompatible with the company's production and maintenance scale. In other words, if the car was too good, it would be bad for business. This inversion of logic, where a company rejects a good innovation because it generates less profit, is a clear symptom of a system addicted to planned obsolescence. Cars that last a long time, that don't break down, that don't need oil, filters, or parts changes. This would be a commercial disaster for an industry that profits not just from sales, but from service and parts throughout the vehicle's entire useful life. NASA, therefore, found itself in the middle of a political, economic, and strategic chessboard. On the one hand, technical advances that could transform the world. On the other, a wall of resistance formed by billionaire interests. There was no room for confrontation. There was only one way out: shut up. And that's what happened. In the archives available today, it is difficult to find any direct mention of the project. It appears in secondary reports, often with code names or indirect references. Some technical publications from the time were collected. Others were updated with modified data. A true cleaning operation, carried out silently and meticulously. The public? I never knew. Never had access. He never had a choice. And here is the real conflict of this story. A technology that could have brought forward the energy. Transition by 50 years was deliberately buried. Not by failure, but by choice. A choice made by few, but which affected billions. A choice that shaped the world we have today. When looking at this story, the question that arises is not just, why did they hide it? But rather, how many other technologies have already been erased from the map by greater interests? How many times has the future been silenced for fear of losing control? This isn't just a story about a car. It's a story about power, silence, and the real cost of progress when it threatens those who rule the game. In 2004, something unexpected came to light. A set of technical documents, previously classified as confidential, was finally released through a request based on the United States Freedom of Information Act, the famous FOIA. In the midst of hundreds of pages forgotten in a NASA technical file, something caught the attention of independent researchers: performance reports and field tests of an experimental vehicle developed in the 1970s. The surprise was immediate. This vehicle, created more than 30 years earlier, boasted numbers that surpassed the first commercial electric cars of the 21st century. Autonomy, thermal performance, recharge time. Everything was there. Written in technical language, often hidden under acronyms and graphics, but the data was too clear to ignore. The prototype in question, which many believe to be the lost model of the NASA-GM partnership, had an autonomy of up to 320 kilometers on a single full charge, something that would only be achieved by commercial vehicles like the Tesla Model S from 2012 onwards. More than that, it was equipped with photovoltaic solar panels installed directly on the roof and hood, which powered secondary systems and, on sunny days, could keep the vehicle's reserve charge active for hours. At the time, talking about cars with solar panels seemed like science fiction. In the 1970s, the efficiency of solar panels was extremely limited, and production costs made their use impractical for the consumer market. But NASA did not operate under the same commercial criteria. It had already used solar technology in satellites, lunar probes, and orbital stations. Taking this solution to a land vehicle seemed natural, and that's exactly what they did. Another impressive fact present in the documents is the use of a liquid cooling system for batteries. While most electric vehicles until the early 2000s used simple ventilation or passive cooling solutions, this prototype had a closed thermal control loop inspired by space projects, the same type of system used to keep computers and scientific instruments running in the vacuum of space with extremely precise thermal efficiency. This efficient cooling had a vital function: maintaining the battery temperature within an ideal range even in extreme climates, increasing the car's range and preserving its useful life. An essential concept, but one that would only be incorporated into commercial cars from Tesla and other manufacturers almost 4 decades later. Even more curious, these documents were not completely hidden. They had been filed under generic headings, in broad categories such as land mobility technology and energy performance tests on experimental transportation systems. None of them directly mentioned that there was a prototype of an electric car that could have changed history. It was necessary to cross-reference data, compare technical standards, and scientific archaeology work carried out by engineers and investigative journalists to decipher what had been buried there. And the conclusion was inescapable. The project was, in fact, functional. It easily outperformed commercial EVs launched until the mid-2000s. And yet, it was completely ignored by the industry. But why did this happen? Why was this advance ignored for so long? This is the question that raises eyebrows even among experts. The most common, and perhaps the most disturbing, explanation is that this advance was intentionally stifled. Contrary to popular belief, the best technologies do not always win. Often, they are silenced before they even reach the public. In this case, the implications are enormous. If a car with solar panels, advanced autonomy, and battery thermal control already existed in the 70s, why wasn't it used as the basis for subsequent models? Why, instead, has the industry spent more than 30 years ignoring these basic principles and insisting on inefficient solutions? The answer may be linked to the structure of the economy at the time. The big automakers weren't interested in reinventing the wheel. They were interested in maintaining their mass production models with predictable profits, based on fossil fuels and recurring maintenance. A highly efficient, durable, and low-maintenance electric car represented a complete break with this business model. What's more, in the 1970s, electrical technology was associated with limitations. People were used to thinking that electric vehicles were slow, weak, and impractical, showing the public that NASA had developed an EV with performance comparable to, or even superior to, combustion cars could completely change that perception. It could generate pressure for change. It could threaten the stability of entire sectors of the economy. So, the path chosen was silence. These documents remained hidden, not because they were secret, but because there was no interest in publishing them. Filed under bureaucratic titles, without disclosure to the press, without political interest, there was no lobby to push that kind of discovery. And where there is no money, there is no attention. This is the big twist in this story. NASA's advanced electric car didn't disappear because it failed. He disappeared because it was too successful. And this success has become dangerous. For automakers, for oil companies, for the entire power structure built around dependence on oil. Years later, when brands like Tesla began to gain ground, these ideas began to resurface. The use of solar panels in experimental EVs has once again been discussed. The battery cooling system began to be treated as a competitive differentiator. But all of this already existed before. It had already been done, tested, proven. The difference? Now there was a narrative ready to accept this. Before, there wasn't. Today, these 2004 documents circulate in restricted circles. They are discussed by engineers, researchers, clean energy enthusiasts, but they remain invisible to the general public. They don't appear on magazine covers. They are not mentioned in official interviews. They continue to be treated as a curiosity, rather than as evidence of deliberate technological suppression. And this is the greatest irony of all. The technology that could have anticipated the electric car revolution by decades was among us, and it was buried, not by time, but by the choice of a few. Today, when we talk about electric cars, one name dominates all conversations: Tesla. For many, it represents the beginning of a new era. The clean mobility revolution, the technological shift that finally challenged the supremacy of combustion engines. But what if all this isn't exactly new? What if Elon Musk's much-celebrated electric revolution is not the beginning, but the resumption of something that had already been done, and then buried? The story you have heard so far is not just a historical curiosity. She is a mirror of the present. It shows how clean, efficient, and functional technology has been deliberately stifled in the past, and forces us to question, what else has already been erased by the technological elite? Tesla, in fact, managed to put EVs back at the center of the debate, but its success only came when the global scenario became impossible to ignore. The climate crisis, the uncontrolled rise in temperatures, the pressure for environmental regulations. All of this forced governments and companies to look to the future more responsibly. But it's worth remembering, lost time will not be recovered. We had the chance to begin this transition 50 years ago, and we lost. We lost because bigger interests spoke louder. The oil lobby, which moves trillions of dollars a year, has had decades to consolidate its influence. It created a global infrastructure based on the consumption of fossil fuels. It sponsored campaigns and financed scientific studies that minimized environmental impacts. And he stopped, with force, any advance that threatened his dominance. Therefore, it was not just technology that was buried, it was a possibility for a different future, a less polluted world, a society less dependent on the extraction, transportation, and burning of oil. And all this because, at the time, changing was not convenient. Today, we pay the price. The planet heats up. Air quality in large cities worsens. The search for lithium and rare metals generates new geopolitical conflicts, and the race to compensate for decades of technological delay has become an emergency. The renaissance of electric vehicles, led by Tesla and other brands, is undoubtedly a step forward. But it's also a reminder: history repeats itself. And if we don't pay attention, we could allow the past to repeat itself again, with new technologies being blocked, censored, or delayed by interests unwilling to lose control. NASA's electric car isn't just a forgotten piece of the past. It is a warning of what happens when progress threatens profit. And the question remains: what else is still being hidden? What if I told you that this wasn't the only time a revolutionary technology was buried by those who were supposed to promote it? What if NASA's electric car case wasn't an outlier, but just another piece in a pattern that repeats itself, decade after decade? What you've seen so far is just the beginning of a much broader web. History is full of brilliant innovations that were suppressed, ignored, or purposefully discredited. Ideas that could have transformed the world, but were vetoed by economic, military interests, or simply for fear of breaking the balance of power. In the next video, you will find out another electric car that was almost used in military operations during one of the greatest tensions in modern history. A vehicle designed for strategic missions, silent, efficient, and capable of operating in extreme environments. It was about to be sent for testing in conflict zones. But suddenly the project was vetoed. The official reason? Strategic questions. But behind the scenes reveals another story. Internal documents show that this decision may have been influenced by much more complex interests than previously imagined. A militarized EV that could eliminate dependence on fuels in field operations was considered too risky. Not for the enemy, but for the military structure itself and its suppliers. You won't believe the number of projects that never reach the public simply because they challenge the system. So, if you've made it this far, now is the time to participate. Do you believe that NASA hid this car due to external pressure coming from the oil industry, automakers, and large economic groups? Or do you think the decision was internal, a strategic choice made to keep technological control in the hands of a few? Comment below. Your opinion matters, and it can help others see what's really behind the decisions that shape our present. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and don't miss the next investigation. What comes next goes even deeper. We will reveal a military electric vehicle that had everything to change the course of history, but was shelved before leaving the base. Get ready to find out the EV that almost went to war and was never seen again.